Hello everybody, welcome to NQA's webinar on OHSAS 18001 migration to ISO 45001. My name is Terry Fisher. I'm the Principal Occupational Health and Safety Management Systems Assessor. Just to give you a brief overview, if you've got any questions, if you can type them into the question box as we go, and depending on the type of question, we'll answer them as we go if we can. Just to remind everybody, I can't answer direct questions about a particular organisation. I can only answer questions related to the interpretation of the standards. So I can't tell you what to do or how to do it. I can clarify the interpretation of the standard and its requirements. So we'll proceed at that. As I say, if you have any questions, type them into the box and we'll try and answer them as we go. And if not, we can have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation to catch up on things that we may not have covered in enough detail. So, why implement 45001? Well, firstly, it's a structured management system, and it now joins the other ISO management systems and standards in relation to occupational health and safety. What's the benefit? It looks at a risk-based thinking principle throughout, so it's based on business needs and requirements, based on risk and opportunities. It looks to enhance worker engagement. It's a proactive approach to risk management, giving a systematic approach and a systematic structured way for your management system to be effective. It can reduce culpability. It should enhance protection. It should provide a structured approach to leadership, leading to action and improvement. And first and foremost, it should enhance performance for worker protection throughout the organisation. ISO 45001 is based on an Annex SL structure, which has been introduced over the last few years to other management systems, including 9001 and 14001. It's based on a 10-chapter structure comparable across all those standards. All new management system standards within the ISO suite of management systems is adopting the Annex SL framework. This is to help create an integrated approach to management systems, to reduce duplication, and to make it easier to integrate management systems for the whole of a business system rather than just specific elements. So this is one of the primary functions of ISO Annex SL structure. The 45001 structure that we're particularly interested in, the first three elements, scope, normative references, and terms and definitions, refer to the standard itself, describing what the standard is trying to achieve, the normative references, and the terms and definitions used within. The bits that we're interested in that apply to the various organisations that subscribe to ISO 45001 are the context, leadership, planning, support, operation and performance evaluation and improvement, sections 4 to 10 inclusive. So the management process, we're looking for cultural change and improve OHS performance, protect workers from injury and ill health. As we then use the sections to go around the management system, you can see the various elements, build on the requirements of each section, and you can see some examples there. Section 4, the context of the organisation, is a really important addition to the management structure. It was probably always considered as part of the management system, but it wasn't formally recognised in the 18001 version of the standard, whereas within this new standard, because it's an ISO standard and adopting this framework, it's now recognised, which is comparable to other management systems. The context of the organisation looked at external issues and internal issues, the activities and the purpose of the organisation. It also looked at the interested parties in relation to OH&S, including workers as a primary interested party, and there could be others, legal, regulatory, commercial, and the range is almost endless depending on what your organisation does. We then go into section 5, the leadership, which looks at the strategy, the policy, the roles and responsibilities. And another enhanced requirement there is the participation of workers within the management system requirements. Section 6 is hazard identification for risk and opportunities, looking at compliance obligations, occupational health and safety objectives, and planning to meet those objectives. Section 7 and 8 is the support and operation element of the standard, looking at resources, competencies, communication, documentation, and awareness. And also looked at the hierarchy of control that's been applied to the management of OHS requirements, management of change, procurement, contract control, emergency preparedness in section 8. And section 9 and 10 being the evaluation and improvement elements, looking at internal audit, management review, incident and corrective action, improvement objectives, and the improvement process generally. Have a first question. The question is, does this replace the need for other accreditations, i.e. 14001 and 9001 respectively? No. The existing framework for management standards, they're all based on the same structure, the Annex SL structure. So this isn't a combined management standard. This is just using the same structure as the 2015 version of 14001 and 9001 respectively. So it isn't out to replace them. What this is, obviously those other two look at various disciplines. One looked at the environmental management for 14001, 9001 looked at quality management, and this is the occupational health and safety management system requirements, that they're all based on the same structure, that Annex SL. So basically they can all be viewed as business management systems, and you could turn around and say there's basically primarily a model for various disciplines. So there's one for environment, one for quality, one for occupational health and safety, and they can be added to with others for information security, etc. 27001. So it joins a suite of management standards that can be used by organisations to help them deliver business benefit and have a structured approach to their system. The starting point of the occupational health and safety management system should help you identify, manage and improve, leading to improved performance and meet compliance obligations and legal and other requirements. So the scope is built up by the context, the understanding and awareness of the interested parties, and the leadership requirements, what the organisation itself needs, what it wants to do, what it wants to be, what it wants to achieve. That should all be considered prior to determining the scope of the management system. Have another question here. If a company, if as a company we meet all the requirements of 45001, would we also meet the requirements of OHSAS 18001 2007? The basic principles of occupational health and safety management systems haven't changed to a great extent. What 45001 does is enhances those requirements. So in simple terms, there may be some technical variations between the two standard systems. However, 45001 is the first international standards organisation version of an occupational health and management system, and is designed to replace OHSAS 18001-2007 in 3 years' time. So if you meet all the requirements of 45001, there would no need to have any other additional requirements captured within 18001, if that makes sense. You don't need to have a duplicate system. You would look at going for one or the other. So if we look at the context of the organisation, this is basically looking at what the organisation is, what the organisation does, why does it do it, and what's it trying to achieve by doing that. So if you think of the context of the organisation and its understanding of what it does and its interested parties, if you think about the various contexts of, let's say, a water company, which may be a public limited company, will be very different potentially to a university, which is maybe an educational establishment, which again could be very different from a food manufacturer, which may be a private limited company, going down to, let's say, a family-owned small engineering business. All will have very different contextual requirements that apply to them. And what the standard is looking at is for you to understand what your requirements are, where those needs are coming from in terms of interested parties, what those needs are, and how you then meet those needs going forward. We've got another question. We currently meet the requirements of 18001. What now are the key differences that we need to address to migrate to 45001? This is basically the whole point of this presentation, is to look at the requirements of 45001. Context of the organisation is a new requirement. It was never identified in 18001. So this is one of the key requirements of 45001, and therefore is something that you would need to address, which is different to 18. The question also asks, many certification bodies have accreditation for OHSAS 18001, but not yet for ISO 45001. Can they certify to ISO 45001, or could they issue an interim accredited certificate for 18? Don't quite understand the question there. Basically, to give you an overview, within the UK, the whole of the certification bodies are currently not able to issue accredited certificates to 45001, but the majority that are previously approved for 18001 can continue to issue certificates in relation to that. We're taking the view that if anyone needs a certificate prior to us getting our official certification from UCAS, we will issue a letter of risk and an unaccredited certificate as an interim measure pending our accreditation, and then we'll review the application for that individual organisation, basically to confirm that there's been no changes or whatever. We are expecting the process of UCAS accreditation to go through sometime mid-year. So nobody in the UK yet has got any accreditation for 45001, which is UCAS approved, but we're expecting to get the primary approval from UCAS mid-year. So we can still issue certificates to 18,001. We can issue unaccredited certificates to 45,001, and then they would be reviewed post our accreditation process being successful. Hope that clarifies the position. And that's not just NQA, as I say, that's across the whole of the certification bodies within the UK. So ISO 45001 in the context of the organisation can be applied to a range of different organisations, can be applied to different sizes of organisations, but they still must understand the context of the organisation. And this is a primary new requirement within the management standard, which wasn't available in 18001. For those of you that need some clarification on the differences between 18001 and 45, we also produce a client gap guide explaining the primary differences and to help demonstrate the difference between the various clauses of the two management systems. That's available from our website. The context of the organisation is, as I say, a big primary difference within the requirements of 45,001. So within that clause, it's looking at understanding the organisation, what does the organisation do and why, understanding the needs and expectations of workers and other interested parties. These are all requirements of 45. And only when you've understood those two elements in 4.1 and 4.2 can you determine the scope of the OHS management system. For those of you with an existing OHS system, 18001, that scope may well have been defined previously, and it may still be appropriate to continue with that scope. But you still need to look at understanding the organisation and the interested parties, including the primary interested party being workers, because they are the primary protection group that you're trying to protect from ill health and injury. So when we look at the context of the organisation, we want to consider various factors. Some organisations choose a PESTEL analysis, looking at the legal, political, economic, social, technical, technology and environmental considerations, which are potentially external to the organisation but can influence what it does. And internal factors may include strategy, structure, the style of the organisation, the staff's knowledge and competence and understanding, the skills, the systems that are already deployed and the activities, and the shared values and culture of the organisation. When we talk about interested parties within 45,001, workers are the primary interested party that must be considered at every element of the OHS system. But, so when we talk about workers, that can include managers, because they are also workers as well, contractors, agency members, regulators, customers, visitors, members of the public. It also fits in to the other management standards of ISO 9001 and 14001. Context is a requirement of all the three standards that apply. So from the 2015 version of 9001 and the 2015 version of 14001, all require this consideration of context. So as I say, looking at the scope of the management system, it can only be defined after the context and the workers and the interested parties have been considered, so you can define how you're going to build your management system and what controls are appropriate for the activities and the risks and hazards that are evident within your existing requirements. The emphasis has changed from a management emphasis, which was on 18,001, to a leadership emphasis in the 45,001. Basically, we're looking for leadership, not just management of, i.e. we've appointed a manager for health and safety. Leadership is a far more embracing term, and the clauses have been expanded as the system has been developed. So leadership looks at not just the appointment of roles and responsibilities and the policy, also looks at removing barriers, encouraging participation. The whole remit of other elements within the management standard can be embedded within the leadership requirement. So it's a really important clause within the revised management standard of 45,001. And as I say, it deliberately goes away from using just management in isolation, because leadership is far more than just appointing management. It's about actively pursuing the benefits of an effective management system. In the leadership clause, you are looking at roles and responsibilities and authorities. The phrase accountabilities has been dropped from the title through the development of this standard. And those roles and responsibilities and authorities need to be available as documented information as required within 45,001. The other major emphasis within this standard is consultation and participation of workers is a key element, and as the standard's been developed, this has been really emphasised in the various requirements. So it's looking at the mechanisms and removal of barriers, allocating time and resources, providing information and communication and training and development as appropriate, looking at non-manager participation in the identification of hazards and controls. And we had a workshop this morning and this question was discussed at length. When we talk about non-management participation to identify hazards, that can include management roles within the organisation. It's talking about workers and management roles working collectively to identify hazards and controls, not just left down to, if there is an appointed occupational health and safety manager, not just left down to them to do that in isolation, because they won't have the in-depth knowledge that the operators and the effective leadership team within that organisation have on how actually processes and activities are undertaken. They may have a theoretical overview, and we want the practical, real-life scenario to be effectively embedded within the management standard. And the identification of risks and hazards and opportunities needs to be based on real-life activity, not a theoretical, what we think is happening. And it's about engagement with the whole of the management standard and system. So it's involvement in policy, risk, investigations, corrective actions, implementation, suggestions, improvements, etc., etc. So it's the whole top to toe basis of worker engagement, regardless at whatever level those workers are. It really is a fundamental key to implementing an effective management standard, is to get this worker participation and engagement embedded within the organisation and develop it going forward. When we're looking at hazards and risk reduction under the planning sections and the operational controls, the hierarchy of controls is brought forward again, and that looks at the most effective method being the elimination of the hazard and the risk, down to substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE being the least effective method of control. So when you're looking at changing controls, that's really the structure that you need to be applying. Look at elimination being the primary control that's the most effective. Also within the planning clauses is the actions to address risk and opportunity. So we're not just talking about risks now, we're talking about risk and opportunity, opportunities for improvement, something that can be identified, improved, not necessarily based on an incident and reaction to an incident or an accident or report of. So we're looking at opportunities for improvement as well as ways of addressing risk. It's looking at hazard identification and risk assessment in the normal way. And as I say, it's looking for these opportunities. It's also looking at the legal and other requirements. So obviously, legal requirements, statutory mandatory requirements, we haven't got an option. It's identifying the appropriate legal requirements that apply to your organisation. And when it talks about other requirements, you could include in that other requirements things like ISO 45001. It's something that an organisation may choose to subscribe to, may choose to want to work within, but it's not a statutory requirement. So it's things like that that you must also consider. Because these are all influences that can influence the strategic direction of the business to demonstrate it's achieving what it needs to do. So looking at legal and other requirements within that. And then planning to take action. So obviously, you know, we need to plan, we need to consider, and the key objective there is taking some action to address the risks and opportunities that have been identified through the hazard assessment processes. As well as that, there is a requirement to look at and deliver OHS objectives. And not just identifying OHS objectives, but planning to achieve them. So, you know, if one of your objectives is let's reduce the accident rate by 50%, how are you going to do that? What actions are you going to do to achieve that outcome? And this is quite common, logical, it's not any different to other management disciplines within the Annex SL framework. The same principles apply in environmental management and in quality management. Obviously, we're looking specifically here for OHS objectives. They need to be maintained as documented information because they also need to be communicated and people need to be aware of what their objectives are within their particular roles and disciplines within an organisation. If they're not documented, how is that communicated? How do they understand how they're going to contribute to the effective implementation of those objectives? So from the risk and opportunities assessments, which is really a fundamental requirement of the OHS management system, it then relates to the policy. That's the strategic direction of the business, the commitment from the business, which can then identify objectives for improvement, looking at the controls of existing operations and activities. The effectiveness of those controls need to be reviewed to ensure that they're delivering that benefit and controlling that risk appropriately. And where possible, looking for improvement. So that's the plan, do, check, act, basically identified within the management structure. This section is centered on communication. So the support section, section 7 of the standard, looks at the various support functions, looking at communication. And the leaders of the organisation need to provide the resources, the information necessary for the establishment, maintenance and continual improvement for the management system. So this is where we're looking at, okay, this is what you say you want to do. So how are we going to do it then? What does everybody need to do? So it needs to be that understanding. And this is very much linked to the leadership and culture of an organisation. So that looks at the resources, the information, the training, the development of knowledge and understanding, all combined to give you the support function within the management standard. So the specific clauses, 7.1, which is resources, it's quite straightforward. Competence. So competence also applies to external workers and can be applied to subcontractors, could be applied to outsourced activities, and also suppliers of services to your organisation. So competence needs to be defined for both internally and externally. What you're looking for from a particular provider, what you're looking for from an internal requirement, and how you're going to either achieve that competence or how are you going to satisfy that competence need, all needs to be available and described within the management system. Awareness, including the ability to remove themselves from work. So this is looking at workers' awareness of if they believe they are in immediate danger of imminent and serious threat to life, they have the right to remove themselves, to protect themselves from that risk without undue consequence for doing so, which is quite a common sense approach, to be fair. There's nothing really devastating about that, I don't think. It's quite fair. And it also brings into the point that, workers need to take some responsibility to consider their own situation, and they can take action to reduce that threat directly without needing necessarily the authority of a higher level within the organisation. Communication, the clause is expanded to include external and internal communication. It should be information as evidence of communication needs to be retained as documented information, and you need to consider who you're communicating to, what you're communicating to, why you're communicating to, and has that been effective communication. And these things are not, we'll do them once and they don't ever develop. These things change over time. And you'll find that throughout the management standard, it's not looking at, well, we'll just look at the clauses one by one. It's looking at, we did that, how can we improve it? Oh, we can get better, that didn't work quite as we wanted, we'll get better. There wouldn't be such a thing as continual improvement if everything was perfect from word go. So the commitment to continual improvement is there throughout every element of the management requirements. Documented information can be a range of media, not just hard copy-based documents and information, and it needs to be suitably controlled. It can also apply in certain modern applications. It could apply to software, for example. If the software is controlling how a process is controlled, so it's controlled by a version of software, then you need to be aware what that version of software is. Is everybody free to then just update that, modify that without some consideration? Probably not. You probably want to have some element of knowledge and awareness of if there are changes to that software, is it going to be implemented, etc. Because it could influence the way the process is controlled, and it could change the controls that are being applied, and it can change the hazards and risks when these things are changed. So it isn't just talking about the traditional procedural controls and documentation, it can also apply to software, because that in the modern environment can be controlling various processes and activities. The operational controls, in a range of changes from development from the FDIS of this standard and through to the publication. But in principle, the primary areas are still operational controls, including maintaining documented information and adapting workers for those considerations appropriately, eliminating hazards and reducing occupational risk, looking at the management of change before you implement that change. So consider the risk before you make the change so you can reduce any hazards. And you can consider the opportunities of making that change in relationship to any potential hazards or changes within risk that are being applied. It needs to be done before the implementation of the change. Procurement now includes general procurement requirements, looking at competence, And it also relates to contractors and outsourcing requirements, because that's the normal sequence of events, shall we say, when we look at procurement. So the procurement process needs to capture competence of contractors and outsourcing requirements. It needs to consider what you're outsourcing, what you're asking a contractor to do. Is it clearly understood who's going to be responsible for what, how that's going to come together as a working practice. So that's all within section 8.1. Then also under the requirements of operational control, we may have identified some potential emergency situations. So looking at emergency preparedness. Obviously, ideally, we want emergency preparedness to be there and never used in action directly as a result of an incident. What we want to do is have the resources and the technical capability of emergency preparedness to be ingrained within the organisation, appropriate to the risks, and also to have trialled and tested that response and not wait for an actual incident. You don't want to find out that your fire equipment's ineffective when you've actually got a fire. So there's ways of testing that and training that, and various ways of testing emergency preparedness, which should be built into the standard operation of an organisation's activities. As I said, this is developed. Most of you will be aware that 45001 has gone through a considerable development process over a number of years. And having carried out the activities, you want to ensure that the monitoring is effective and is confirming that the required outcomes are being delivered. You measure and analyse and evaluate performance data and information, and that can come from a range of sources within your organisation. So it doesn't tell you what performance and things to measure. It says it's based on your requirements as an organisation. Also included in that is the evaluation of compliance. So earlier on we talked about legal and other requirements. So then it's not enough to say, oh, well, we know that there's some statutory obligations, some legal and other requirements are there, and we know we've got procedures and whatever, so that by definition gives us compliance. No, we have to test that compliance and evaluate it in real terms to ensure that what we think are procedural controls are actually physically effective at delivering the compliance with the obligation. It's no good saying we've got a statutory obligation, we've got loads of procedures, so therefore we must be compliant. You need to check that, and that can be done in a range of ways, including audits, inspections, observations, informal walk rounds, etc., in a number of ways within an organisation. It needs to be that evaluation of compliance is an important element of meeting the requirements of the management standard. Then you go into internal audits. So the general requirements there haven't really changed from the previous 18,001 standard. The requirements are basically the same. But it does encourage you to look at a risk-based process approach to internal audit programs. So where you know you've got high risk and they're being effectively controlled. So these areas that are being high risk and are effectively controlled will still need to be audited, because you're confirming that their controls are effectively implemented within that operation. Because without those controls, it is a high risk and it has the potential to do significant harm. So it's based on that requirement that your audit program should reflect those risk assessments and those opportunities for improvement. So the audit program should reflect some of that in relation to the significance of the activity. It also has to confirm that the management system is delivering what is required outcome. So it's a combination of those two things. And that's what the internal audit program needs to reflect based on the risk and the management system requirements. We then go into management review. There's been some word changes within that, but evidence needs to be retained as documented information, and there are requirements then specific to the management review. Now, a management review is looking at the effectiveness of the management system to deliver the required output. Some of these things may also be considered. Some of the things that are included in management review may also be covered in operational reviews. So you may look at internal audit performance or accident performance at operational reviews. But this is looking at the way the management system in its entirety is coming together and is effectively implemented, so that you're establishing, does it do what we need it to do? Is it meeting the requirements of the standard? And more importantly, is it delivering the policy, the objectives, and the legal fulfillment that the company are committed to within its policy? In preventing occupational injury and ill health. So remember, it's about not just accident stats, it's about ill health, which can include mental ill health, stress, etc., as well as the physical accidents and injuries that go on. So it's a very broad spectrum of activity, depending on your activities and your influence and what you do within that, your organisation. But the management review is looking at particular the effectiveness of the management system. The improvement clause, the last section, is looking at the general requirements and looking at incidents, non-conformity, corrective action, and there needs to be documented information retained for that, so that you know how many incidents you've had, so you know the non-conformity, you investigate those incidents, you record the investigation, you record the corrective action, and you record the effectiveness of that corrective action to see that did it deliver the benefit that we expected of it. If not, we better look at it again. It didn't quite do what we needed it to do. We can revisit it. And this is an ongoing cycle of the management system: the plan, do, check, and act. And that's really important. But with regard to continual improvement, I would say an effectively implemented management system will automatically deliver continual improvement. And it is continual, not continuous, to clarify a point made earlier today. Continual improvement is a stepped improvement all the time, and that's what the standard is looking to achieve. And as I say, the management system, if it's been effectively implemented, then continual improvement will be a natural output from that process. It shouldn't really need any consideration, because when you look at you've got requirements for objectives. So if you're achieving your objectives, those objectives are hopefully looking towards improvement in reduction of risk in relation to your policy, etc., looking at opportunities. We've got an opportunity to get better in there. Let's look at that, etc. So the whole management system is looking at a proactive method to deliver continual improvement. So just looking at that in relation to leadership being at the core of that, because without the leadership commitment, it's very difficult to implement an effective management system. You can see support, performance evaluation, planning, support, performance improvement is all linked to the leadership activities within the management standard. That can be influenced by internal and external issues, by the context of the organisation, the needs and expectations of the relevant interested parties, and that relevant interested parties can include the organisation itself, its strategic direction, etc. Looking to deliver enhanced OHS performance, protection and engagement with participation, culture change and improvement, fulfilment and satisfaction of compliance and legal obligations. So the differences, NQA have provided some gap information which is available on our website. Just as an overview there, 18,001-2007 is still available and still active and will be active for the next 3 years, following the publication of 45,001. In March 2021, OHSAS, well, BS OHSAS 18,001 will not be available. So there is this 3-year migration period to introduce 45,001, and it's up to you when you feel the appropriate time within that period is that your organisation can make that transition. The practical tips. Well, if you were starting from scratch, I would advise you to read the standard from ISO. NQA don't sell standards, so you can get them from the ISO organisation. You need to identify sources of legal compliance that are applicable to your organisation, the nature and the activity of what you do and how you do it. So this is where the context links to the legal and other requirements. You need to review your existing hazard and risk assessment process to see how that meets the requirements of the standard. And you may well want to look at a gap analysis either conducted by yourselves, looking at your own review of the management requirements and what your organisation does and has already got in place. You can have a formal gap analysis provided by people like NQA. They can come in at a cost and provide a gap analysis service to you. You may use other external agencies such as consultants, etc. And those migrating from 18,001, read the standard and have it available to you. Look at the gap analysis in the same way. And it may also be very worthwhile to do a bit of a mapping exercise in relation to what you've already got in place and where you think you could meet using your existing operations and your existing system structure to map across to the requirements of 45,001. I would hope that you would be pleasantly surprised by the amount of stuff that is already in place within your organisation, within 18,001, that can map directly across to the requirements of 45,001. The challenge in a lot of cases for the mapping exercise is not whether it's there within the organisation, it's knowing where it is within the organisation and be able to tap into that information as part of the management system. So, hopefully that's been useful. If anyone else has got any additional questions, now is the time to type them in. Obviously, as I said earlier, I can't answer specific organisation related questions. I can only answer generic questions about the application of 45,001. So if anyone's got any questions, now's the time. It doesn't appear at the moment that anybody's got any further questions to add. So all I can say is thank you for joining us and thank you for listening. If we can be of any more help or support, by all means contact NQA. Various bits of information are available on our website. For those of you that have registered to attend the webinar, we will be sending out a copy of the slides as a prompt, as an aide memoir. And if you have any further questions, as I say, we can't consult but we can clarify what the requirements of the standard are. So thank you all once again, and I'll see you next time at our next webinar. Thank you all very much.